Alright, again, good morning everyone. Welcome to another online class in continuation to our
Morning,
computer
sir.
programming
Morning,
1
sir.
lesson. Good morning. Alright, okay, so this class will be recorded. This is to give chance to other students who won't be able to attend today's class. So they'll be able to replay or, watch the replay, or you can also do the same. Alright, so for today's topic, we'll be talking about variables. So last meeting, we've already discussed or we already tried using C++, basically writing simple codes or simple programs. This time around, we're going to make a program that is a little more useful, right? That will be through the introduction of variables. So who among you would like to give us an idea what they think variable is all about? We already experienced that before in our previous years. Would you mind giving us some example, or let's say a short input about what they think would be variables are? Anyone?
Sir,
Kinsa?
Ilaman.
Anila, go ahead.
Kuan, sir. Containers for storing data.
Okay, alright, that's good. Yeah, that's actually true. But unsay sa atong kuan ba sa previous years na to in mathematics, what do you think variables were? Anyone? That's true. Nila, that's true. Kinsa tong race sa ilang hand, wala ko kabantay. Ngano mo mawala dayon? Okay. Open queue. Hold on. Gideon, go ahead.
Kuan, sir, kaning exchange value ang variable, sir.
Okay. That's good. That's true. Okay. So basically, variable. We use variable during our mathematics in our previous years. We use variable if there are some certain numbers or values that we don't know yet. Diba? For example, we are trying to compute the Pythagorean Theorem and we only given two sides of the triangle. So for us to be able to solve the other one, we have to compute it using the Pythagorean Theorem, but we don't know how to solve. We don't know to solve the other side if wala ta kabalo sa duwa ka side, diba? Or something like that. So if there are uncertainty about the values that we'll be using for the equation, or let's say in this case in the program, we use variables. Okay, so it is in programming, variables are temporary data storage. Just like in mathematics, variables store values. In this case, in programming, variables also stores data temporarily. So if you have any questions or clarifications all throughout the class, just click raise hand inside Google Meet. I may also just directly send it in chat or in message here in Google Meet as well. So just a review, last meeting we discussed about C++. So basically I've introduced to you, we were introduced with the C++ programming language, how to install C++, and then creating our very first C++ program, and of course creating our very first function, which is output. Okay, so would anyone please share with us how to install C++ on mobile? Let's start with mobile. Who would like to share? Just a review. How to install C++. Kita to nawala dayon. Just go ahead. Kato ni Ray sa ilang hand. Nawala dayon ang. Again sa mobile lang sa mobile.
Sir, ako, sir.
Go ahead, Bartolome.
Sir, first, video na bisa, sir.
Sure, pwede kayo.
Una, sir, mato ka sa Play Store, sir. Dayo, i-search mo ng C++, sir. Tapos, dito to mo na i-install dito, sir. Tapos, wala to mo siya pag mag-loading, sir. Pag loading, sir, ito na mo, pwede namin siya magamit, sir.
Okay, unsang application gani?
C++, sir.
Is that true, guys? Is it true? C++?
No, sir.
Atong devs, no. CXX Droid. Okay. CXX Droid. Okay, that's true, thank you. How about for desktop or laptop computers? Anyone? How? Okay, Junessa.
Wait. To start writing a program, you have to start by creating a new project. Go to File or New. Ay, wait, di mausa.
Sige. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Ano to, sir?
Hindi, kaya question kay how to start na. How to start working with C++. So,
Okay.
okay, sige, go ahead. How to install, kumbaga.
To start writing a program, you have to start by creating a new project. Go to File or New Project, then select Console Application. Under the Basic tab, click the C++ project. Enter the project name and click OK. You will be prompted to select where you want to save the project. Click Save. You can now begin working on your very first C++ program.
Okay, thank you. Unsa nga application itong gamiton, Janessa?
Kuan sir, kanang ito? Wait sir.
Are you using desktop or laptop or you using phone?
Sir?
Unsa imong gigamit ay laptop or cellphone?
Kuan sir, Android.
Android, okay. Alright, anyone unsay atong gamiton nga application for Windows or for computers?
C++.
Okay.
C++, sir.
Dev C++. Alright. Okay, so that's easy. We just have to install the IDEs or integrated development environments for both Android and Windows, and we'll be able to start working with our first C++ program. So, may gani na ay mga IDE, but some other programmers prefer not to use IDE. The IDEs that we are using are already bundled with compilers, but some programmers prefer to just write the codes on a text editor and then install another compiler. Lisod-lisod kinabuhi. But the good thing about Dev C++ and CXX Droid is that the application itself has its own bundled compiler. Therefore, we don't necessarily have to install any other program, just the IDE itself. Right, so today we'll talk about variables. What exactly are variables in programming? And then, of course, once we talk about variables, we'll be talking about data types. What exactly are data types, and why is it important in programming? And then identifiers, and then how to define, declare, and initialize a variable. So these are the topics that we'll be talking about today, and hopefully you'll be taking down notes. This is going to be a little bit harder than our last meeting. If this is the first time that you encounter programming, medyo maglisod na gamay compared sa atong previous na topic, but it's not gonna be very hard. So long as you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about, you'll be able to catch up, I promise you. Okay, so please take note of the things that we'll be doing, and then so later on we're going to practice using variables in programming. But before anything else, let's have a exercise, brain exercise. It's always good to practice segregating waste properly. Let us dispose of the waste below in appropriate waste bin. Okay, so I have here a list of wastes that we have to put out, and then below are trash cans containing biodegradable, non-biodegradable, and hazardous. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to select each of these waste here and then choose asa dapat ibutang, either sa biodegradable, non-biodegradable, or hazardous. Let's start with the first one. Use tissues, paper towels, napkins. Would like to share asa nato dapat ibutang? Anthony. Go ahead.
Ako, sir?
Yes. Let's start with the first one. Use tissues.
Sir, biodegradable.
Biodegradable.
Pwede pa siya ma-recycle, sir.
Alright. Unsa dyan? Unsa asa ito ibutang?
Biodegradable. Biodegradable.
Napkins. Alright. Because tissues, paper towels, it's a little hard for us to biodegradable. Okay. Wala mo tayo recyclable. Hold on.
Malata, sir. Malata.
Yes. Alright, it's true. Alright, let me highlight it out. So that's gonna be biodegradable. So So that's B. Alright, next. Mass plastic gloves. Anyone? Gideon.
Sir.
Go ahead, Gideon. Paunahin na yun.
Sa non sa non-biodegradable, sir.
Mass
Mga composite o
plastic gloves. Yeah, that's
materials
right.
man.
Okay, so that's true. Non-biodegradable. Hot drink cups. Anyone? Miguel. Sige, go ahead, Miguel.
Sa non-biodegradable, sir.
Yeah.
Non-biodegradable.
Yes, because ang gamiton na kay tuman ng styrofoam sa murag styrofoam.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Alright. Okay, thank you. Next, cold drink cups, straws. Hamlet.
Non-biodegradable, sir.
Okay, non-biodegradable. And then plastic or foil wrappers. Rachel. Madungog niyo si Rachel? Hindi ka ito yung niya.
Next, sir.
Dili mo daw.
Hindi madungog.
Ulitin.
Answer non-biodegradable.
Okay. Alright. Okay, thank you, Rachel. Next, drink pouches and straws. Anyone? Line na po. Rochelle. Rochelle Romualdo.
Non-biodegradable, sir.
Yeah, that's true. Non-biodegradable. Almost non-biodegradable. Okay, next. Candles and wax. Chansai.
Biodegradable, sir.
Candles and wax. Good. That? Biodegradable?
Biodegradable.
Biodegradable as cigarette butts, guys. Di pa sure. Honestly.
Hazard, sir.
Ang
Hazard.
uban, sir.
Hazardous siguro. Let's put it
recycle
into
nila.
hazardous because of the ashes and cigarette butts and they are
Hazard man na siya, sir. Okay.
hazardous.
Tungod sa ashes niya, sir.
That's true. Okay. Next, gum packages, blister pack. Lain na po, balik-balik ng ngalan akong
Hazard,
kita.
sir.
Alright, that's true. Gum packages naman. So,
Hazard, sir.
Nga naman, anong hazardous ang gum packages? Yan lang, non-biodegradable
Dili
lang.
ang hazard, sir.
Okay, non-biodegradable. Light bulbs, dishes, Meichi Kancho, Akacho. Right.
Hazardous, sir.
Okay, hazardous. Obviously, no? Masamad dan. Next, metallic gift wrap and bows. Bows? Junessa.
Hazardous, sir.
Okay. Hazardous. Metallic gift. Hazardous ba? Hazardous ba ang metallic gift wrap and bows? Metallic gift wrap. Di ba kato na? Di na. Ano sa'yo metallic gift wrap? Ako idea. Ako yung research doon.
Ato daw ng silky, sir.
Ito na yung silver namin.
Kanit. Ang silky, sir, patong glossy.
So dili siya hazardous, di ba?
Dili, sir.
Non-biodegradable. Yes, that's true.
Murag foil ka siya, sir.
Marinig.
Biodegradable lagi na, sir.
Non-biodegradable, sir.
Non, sir.
Metallic
Nan,
naman.
siya. Di man siya malata. Nan.
Hindi na malata, sir.
And then broken mugs and dishes. May, Tano.
Hazard.
Answer.
Hazard.
Hazardous.
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 And then clean products.
Pantog, sir. Ito na.
Sorry.
Non-biodegradable.
Okay, non-biodegradable. Alright, so we have only one biodegradable, and then a lot of non-biodegradable, and then 3 hazardous. Okay, so basically, pag-mute na lang, balik. Alright, okay, thank you. Okay, so why are we doing this? What is its significance to programming or in variables? So notice that by understanding the different types of waste, diba, we we segregate them depending on the type, whether or not the waste are biodegradable, non-biodegradable, or hazardous. So we're able to segregate it by understanding its type. All right. So that's the same thing in variables, especially when we'll be using data types. We have to understand the values that a variable may contain, so we can declare it with a proper data type. The same with segregating this waste. We're able to segregate them separately according to its type, whether it's going to be biodegradable, non-biodegradable, or hazardous waste. All right. So since we know exactly how to differentiate or how to segregate these types of waste, then I think it would be easy for us to differentiate the different data so that we can use it. So we can use it for not segregating, for understanding
Sorry.
the data types later on that we'll be discussing. So let's talk about variables. At this point of our academic experience, we should have heard and encountered the term variable. Is that true? Nakadug na tag variables before?
Yes, sir.
Alright, especially
Yes,
in
All the time.
mathematics. Right now, I think na po yung mathematics, di ba? Just like you said,
Tanan, sir.
math mo
Tanan,
kanina.
math.
Alright,
Sir,
and
math, sir.
okay, this is let me share you something about mathematics. Ako, I am a student who loves math. When I was in high school, as much as possible, if na ako'y chance nga mo attend og mga math competition outside school, I present myself. Dili ko top sa klase, but I present myself. I often get picked. But the longer that I was exposed, kana bang nagsige na lamang kog math kanana, murag nalato ko ba? So I thought when I enrolled in IT nabitan na so maka-adjust na ko og math. Boy, was I wrong. There are a total of 25 units. 25 units tanan ang mathematics amo ang curriculum. Nayo sa ka semester nga duha ka bukong mathematics, isa ka major. Na ba? So kulang na ana pa to ako ang math professor namo sa una. Kulang na lang mi og I think 9 units. Then pwede na may mahimong math majors. Na ba? 9 units na lang math major na ang mga IT sa una. I'm not sure pila ka units in yung mathematics nun.
Tulo.
Tulo.
In total, sir?
Okay. Total ba tanan? Wa pa mo
About
kabalo?
4th year, sir.
Ha?
About 4th year.
Oo, makabalo mo? Pila siguro.
Na, sir.
Wala naman na-check sa amuang kuhan, sir.
Naman na sa yung prospectus po.
Prospectus, wala naman na-check.
If na, pakicheck. Ang asa una is 25 units overall. Tag 3-3. Then na usa ka 5 units which is katong calculus, trigonometry rather. 5 units. So kada adlaw may magklase ug math. Alright, so obviously since we are IT and you are in since IT mo, we know exactly what variables are, regardless if IT or not. But there are a greater chance nga mas nakabalo mo of variables because we are IT. But again, at this point of our academic experience, we should have heard and encountered the term variable. Again, in mathematics, it temporarily, or not temporarily, but it allows us to replace a certain value that we don't know with letters or something like that. Whether in algebra, geometry, just about any branch of mathematics, it's usually the symbol for representing an unknown value. Diba? Find x. Ganun find man sa x na x na gani. One notable example is the use of variables in the Pythagorean Theorem. What do you mean? Para asan yung Pythagorean Theorem? Kasi makashare. Kasi makashare ba? The theory of computing. Parang saan siya? When do we use Pythagorean Theorem? Kinsa? Wala. Alright. The Pythagorean Theorem is used to compute the size of a triangle. Alright. So this triangle. So if this is let's say 5 meters, this is let's say 4 meters. What is the value of this side? Alright. So we will use Pythagorean Theorem. So Pythagorean Theorem is maybe one of the most notable example of equations, mathematical equations that uses variables. So here, since we don't know what is the value of either of these sides, then we will replace it with some kind of letters that will represent temporarily on the unknown value. So for example, if this is A, this is B, then it is C squared equals A squared plus squared, something like that. Or tako ba? Nalimot ako. Something like that. A variable is a portion of memory that stores data values that our program can manipulate. So it's similar, of course, it's similar to how we use variables in mathematics. Variable is a portion of memory that stores data so that we can manipulate in our program. Each variable in C++ has a specific type, which the size, layout, range of values, and set of operations that can be applied to the variable. The difference between the variable between mathematics and programming is that mathematics can only store numerical value. So in math, write it down here. Variables can store numerical value. Am I right? Sakto ba? Numerical values lang siya, just like atong ganina, atong how to find this side of the triangle. So dili man ang side sa triangle is really a number. Dili man siya ingon nga, di man siya text, dili siya characters, dili siya symbols. It's numbers. And the variables in programming, however, can store rather in programming. Variables can store, all right, different types. We mean data types. This includes either text, numbers, words, group of words, letters, so on and so forth. So not just numerical value, but just about any data that we can use in our computers. All right. So what are the different data that we are using? If we wanna compute something, that's numerical value. If we wanna read a text, that's a text. If you want to type in letters, let's say mo take tag exam and choose the right multiple choice, then we are using letters. That's also we can also use variables for that. So in programming, we can use different data types, unlike in mathematics that we can only store numerical value. That's the difference between them. So when do we use variables? Alright, kano sa tamo gamit og variables in programming? We will use variables in our C++ programs once we are going to deal with any data that our program will use. And for that, we are going to set a variable for each and every data being dealt as much as possible. So basically, we'll be using variables if we are going to make programs that are a little more useful. Let's say, for example, if you want to create a program that will compute the number if you want to create a program that will compute the sum or the arithmetic value of two numbers, all right. So first of all, you have to create a variable for the first number. Let's call it number. It's one variable, and then the second number, that number, and then third variable for the result. So you don't know kung saan ang i-enter sa user, diba? Since the program that we are trying to create is a calculator. So obviously, we can expect that the user may enter different numbers. Diba? Lahi-lahi ang iyahang numbers na i-enter. Now, how do we make sure that our program will work every time even though lahi ang number na i-enter sa user? That's the time that we'll be using variables to temporarily store those numbers that the user entered. So for example, ang user na 1 i-enter siya of 3 for num1, and then for num2 i-enter siya 5. So the result is 8 because the result is going to be the sum of 3 plus 5. Now the next user may enter different number. The next user may enter 8 and 6. That will also return a different result. Diba? Lahi-lahi ang pwedeng i-enter sa users. That's why we are going to use variables to make sure that our program will still work every time even though lahi-lahi ang i-enter na data from the users. Okay, nag-gets ang idea? Why do we use variables? Nagets siya? Or should I explain it again? Do you follow, guys?
Explain again, sir.
Okay.
Sige pa, explain pa, sir.
Good. All right. Seryoso? All right, it's okay. Again, for example, let me erase this all para. Okay, let me erase this all. So again, why do we use variables in programming? So let's say we are going to create a program that will compute the average of 3 numbers. So how many numbers are we going to compute?
3.
3. How do we get the variable of how do we get the average of 3 numbers? So obviously we're going to use variables because we don't know what are the numbers that the users will enter. So for example, di mata mo create a program na pa usa ra ka gamit, di ba? We have to create a program that can be used as much as possible. So let's say the first user ni-enter siya og 5, 6, and 7. So that's good. So basically our program will compute the average. However, the next time that you're going to use it, dako kayo nga chance nga lahi na pud nga number ang imong i-enter, di ba? Let's say the next number that you're going to enter is going to be 6, 7, and 8, and so on. So it wouldn't be very practical if every time that we're going to create a program, it will only cater these numbers, di ba? Dili mo make sense nga mo create a program nga kanira iya i-compute. What if we enter og lain nga number ang user? Di ba? So since we don't know the numbers that the users are going to enter to our program, we will use variables to replace this temporarily. Alright? So if we're going to compute the value of, if we're going to compute the average of 3 numbers, how many variables are we expecting to use? Pila siguro ka variable?
3, sir.
3? Alright. It's like, who would agree? Yeah, 3.
4, sir.
Nganong 4 man? Go ahead. Nganong 4? Kinsa to? Bartolome to? That's true. The answer is 4, but why?
Apil ang answer na anak, sir, sa variable.
That's true.
Sir,
Right? Because of the result.
Ang answer sa day, kaupat man, sir.
That's true. Since we don't know the value of the numbers na i-enter sa user, obviously we also don't know the value of the result. So in this case, let's say for example, what is the average of 5, 6, and 7? What do you think is the answer? So that's 5 plus 6, 11, 18 divided by, what is the average? Go ahead, dali. Alright, it's 5 plus 6 plus 7, that's 18 divided by 3, because there are 3 numbers, that is 6, right?
6.
So the average is 6. Alright, so that's the reason why we have to use variables. So because we can't expect that the user will keep on entering these numbers only. Like lahi ang number nga iyang i-enter. So how do we make sure that our program will work every time? We're going to use variables. Okay? So in creating variables, alright, our goal is to reserve a storage in a program where the data will be stored in. So it can be used in the program. My note here doesn't make any sense, but what I'm trying to say is we are going to store the numbers temporarily on our program, on our computer. For example, this one right here, so that we can use it at a later time. It can be manipulated within the program itself. Alright, we can either compute them, whatever it is that we want to do. Okay? So in another thing to take when creating or when writing variables is that we can write whatever we want. Okay? Although of course na may exception, but let's just say that writing the variable name is something that we can just do it ourselves. Just like in mathematics, that let's say find x, y, z, so on and so forth, or let's say a, b, c, so on. In programming, we can use whatever words we want. We can either use words, we can use one letter, we can use numbers. It would be totally up to us. So just like this is an example of a variable. and this is also a variable. So we can use words, multiple letters, or numbers in writing variable. So unlike atong common nato sa mathematics na we're only using x, y, and z, a, b, c, something like that. In programming, we can use words. All right, take note of that. Just like this, num1, num2, and then sum. Pero na ibang mga words na dili nato pwedeng gamiton because they are reserved in C++ libraries. I will talk more about it in just a moment. So this is an example of a variable in finding the sum of two numbers. So we'll first create our first variable as num1. This is first variable, and then this is second. And since we're trying to compute the sum of two numbers, obviously we store the sum somewhere. Kinahanglan po tang store of variable, or we have to make a space for the sum, for the result. So that's why we have our third variable. So these are all variables. Let me erase all of them. And then once you already stored the variables in your program or in the computer, you can do whatever you want to do with it. In this case, we added both the first kane and this one right here for us to be able to generate the result, which is the sum. So again, since these are variables, we can store any numbers that we would like, that we want. So it could be either, for example, 2 plus 3. Obviously, once it will be added, then the result is 5. We can store any other numbers. Let's say 10, 80, 9, 20, or something like that. It will be totally up to us, and the result will automatically be rendered. So since we use variable, there are no limit as to what numbers are we going to enter, because we used variable to store whatever number we want. So another example of variable is this. So ganina, puro numbers, and in mathematics, puro numbers ang atong gina-store sa atong variables. But this time, we can also, in programming, we can also store letters, symbols, and just about any other data type. That's the good thing about programming. It's not limited to numbers only, but it can store multiple data types. In this case, we use text or group of letters. Okay, so we can also store group of letters, words, single letters, symbols, characters, etc. Okay, so this time, let's try to create our very first program using variable. Let's try to take a look na lang sa. Let's take a look at this codes right here. This is an example of a program that will compute the sum of two numbers. So this program will compute and display the sum of 5 and 6. Since we declared that the variable a is 5 and the variable b is 6, this time we initialized a value. So here we initialize three variables, like I said, a, b, and sum. One for the first number, which is 5, then the second number, which is 6, and then the sum. Basically, it is just like we just reserve a storage for all the numbers 5, 6, and the sum, so that the program will be able to use it. In this case, the program uses it to compute and display the result. So in this case, we used variables a, b, and then sum, but we initialized value, meaning it will only compute 5 and 6, and then the sum. So it's very easy, but maybe that's the easiest way on how we're going to use variables in programming. Nagets ra niyo ang code siguro without running this? Nagets ra? Or do you want me to run this code? I-run na lang na to.
I-run daw, sir.
Sir.
Try ko ng run, sir.
Sige, sure. So we're going to create a simple program that will compute the value of compute the sum of two numbers. So first, file, new, project, console application, C++, let's say, variables. C++ program. First semester, computer programming, plus program. Right? Unsa tayo sulat na to dere? Include IOStream, then anyone who would like to help
Namespace.
Using namespace, sir.
using namespace?
Standard.
STD. Alright. It's okay. Let me
Using
just finish it
namespace
up
STD.
para madali ta. But make sure you already
In
you
main.
memorize this, okay? Especially kaning first 6 lines or kaning lines. Make sure you've already memorize this part right here. Okay, so diri nato ibot atong code. So first is we're going to declare, okay? And for the meantime, just try to follow through and then we'll discuss more about variables in just a moment. But the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to declare a variable. How to declare variable, we'll talk more about it. But basically, you're going to first write the data type. Again, we'll discuss in just a moment. So we're going to declare a data type, an integer, meaning a number, and let's give it a variable name a. And then let's give it an initial value niya. Let's say, what's the example ganina? 5 and 6. So 5. And then for b, we're going to initialize it with 6. And then the third variable is sum. The value is a plus b. Alright? That means whatever it is that the value of a and b, we're going to add it. It will display the value of the variable sum. So all we need to do is to display the value since the sum already computed na nata itong formula, na nata equation. The next thing that we're going to do is display the value. So how do we think we should do? Saan na to siya pag-display? Since i-discuss na to last time. Gideon, go ahead.
I-declare ang answer katong C out da yung katong less than da yung sum.
Less than. That's right. Okay. So and then last return 0. Alright, don't you worry guys, just try to
Return
follow
0.
through. I'm going to discuss it you one by one. Alright, so basically we've used variable a and b for our first and second number, and for us to compute the sum, we also use another variable, alright, which is sum in this case, and then the value of sum is whatever it is that the value of a and b added together. Okay, and then since we already have our computation here, we're just going to display the value. In this case, we use the cout function or object, and then let's save this variable and execute, compile and run. Excuse me. Nabugno na akong kape. Alright, it says here that the answer is 11. Is it true?
Yes,
Sakto ba
sir.
ang answer?
Yes.
Chadder
Yes, sir.
lagi madiri, sir.
Unsa?
Chadder ang madiri sa programming kaysa kuan. Tong pre-cal.
Okay. Basic pa man, alright? Basic pa man nga programming. But soon, once you'll be doing with actual programming in the future, especially if you'll become programmer soon, dili lang plus imong gamiton. And right now, we're just going to deal with the easy mathematics. Our goal here is not math, but programming. Okay? Alright. So, what if, okay, let me just give you a general idea of, let's say, siguro an advanced idea. What if ganahan ko nga lahi-lahi na number? Just like atong gimong example ganina. So atong example ganina is lahi-lahi man nga number. So what if dili 5 and 6 ang ganahan? So let's try. We can either change this. Let's say 10, and then let's say 2, 5, 5. All right. Let's save that. The same thing. Di na ta kinalang usbon ang ato ang formula. We just have to change the value of the variable. And then execute, compile, and run. It will still give us the right answer. 265. Alright, so that's the good thing about variable because we don't necessarily have to change the entire program. We just have to change the numbers that we're going to enter. And then it will automatically provide us the result if we want. Now, obviously, this is not the proper way in creating a programming, a calculator using programming. The proper way is this. First is we're going to remove the values. Do you have any question, Gideon?
Sir, what if kanang maog yun sa calculator sir ba nga like dito ko mo input og number dire kay sa program manaw
Okay.
dato gibutang. What
Yes,
if sa dito sa run na?
Right. Muna akong i-discuss right. Okay. Thank you, Gideon. All right. So that's how we're going to do it. So we're going to remove the value because we want to enter the value on the program itself once we run it. So it's a little bit advanced. It will be discussed in the future lesson, in our next lesson, but this is how we're going to do it. So same thing, we're going to initialize the variable. We're going to declare or define our variables. We have A, B, that's for the first number, the second number, and then the sum. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we will let the users enter the value for us. That's what we want. So the first thing that we're going to do is, let's say, we're going to instruct the user. Enter the first number. So this time we are just using, hold on. Alright, so familiar ba man this is the cout. Basically, we've already discussed this last time. Basically, it allows us to output a text. So in this case, we just output an instruction that says enter the first number. So obviously, once the users read this, they're going to enter the number. So once they enter na siya og number, we have to set a command that those number will be saved in our variable. So whatever it is that the user will enter, it will be saved in asa nga variable ani, A, B, or sum. Asa siguro nga variable?
A.
So it's A. So we're going to let it save. Dapat i-save na to siya sa A. So again, this is a little bit advanced. It will be discussed in our next meeting. We'll save it sa A. So that's how you're going to save it. So diba cout, that's output, and cin is input. So whatever it is that the user will enter after this, the program will fetch it, yang sa lakon, or yang dawaton, ug i-save niya sa variable A, which is this. Okay? So once the user entered, once the program save it A, may muna punta na cout, enter the second number, and then same thing. Unsa siguro yung next ng buhaton?
Magyapon, sir.
Magyapon. Cin, and then Cn, and then B. Alright? Now that we have values for A and B, and notice this is a little bit confusing. Yep. Ang cout is going to be open angle bracket. Cin is closing angle brackets. Okay? Please take note of that. It's going to be a little bit confusing. Pagbago pa, pero madugay maana duman. And then once nanatay value sa A and B, do you think we can proceed with this? Napatay lang yung code, i-add na. What do you think?
Naa pa, sir?
Salamat.
Kuan ka ng enter the first number.
Ano tanong?
Ay,
Ano tanong?
sakto ba?
Nasa.
Sakto.
Alright, let's try. It's okay, guys. So, kung mataka-discuss with Annie, so medyo but it's okay. I think that's it. We'll check if na pa may error. So let's save that. Let's execute, compile, and run. Okay, here it says enter the first number. So let's enter a number. Let's say 1080. Okay, that's the first number, and then click enter. It will proceed to the next step. Now let's say 920. Alright, so the moment that I'm going to click enter, but the moment that I'm going to click enter, it will display the value of sum, and since the value of sum is A plus B, then automatically na siyang display whatever it is that the answer. So let's try 1. Anong 1? Sum plus B. Anong 1 tayo sa enter 1, cout. Anong 1 ang answer? Hold on, let me save this. Let's read, execute, compile, and run. Kaya may sagot nga number, good, 12. Hold on.
I-enter pa ang add. I-enter pa ang answer para ma-plus sila. Ay, ambot.
Dili na. Kay, na naman ito dire, oh. Alright, let's... Okay, ato na i-erase na daw. we're not gonna do it this way. We're just going to make the value of the sum blank. And instead, din na lang. Dapat mo gana mo siya direct. So, it's okay. It's gonna be sum plus, sum is equals to A plus B. Alright.
Tira sa butag int, sir.
Dili na, since we've already declared it. Let's try.
Okay.
So, since we've already defined our variable, that every time that we're going to use sum, it's going to be an integer or meaning number. So, after we enter A and B, it will compute this equation. That means it's sum is equals A plus B. Let's try. Okay, enter the first number. Let me zoom it in. Let's say 24 and then 12 should be 36 thereafter. Alright, so basically whatever it is that we're going to enter, it will automatically compute depending on the equation that we added. So let's try it again. Let's compile and run, and let's try to use any other number. Alright, let's say major complex divide. Let's say 4, 5, 7 plus 1, 2, 3. 580. Alright, so that's it. Basically, this is how we're going to create a calculator, a very simple calculator, of course. But this time around, the reason why variables are very important is because bisag unsa nga number pwede natong i-enter without constantly changing the program every time. Anthony, go ahead.
Sir, what if line iyahang kuan sir di ira sum sir na division?
Okay. Alright, that will be discussed in our future meeting. Okay, that will be in our future meeting. Let's do it one step at a time lang. For the meantime, let's understand how variables work, and then after this, we're going to create more complex programs. And then in our future, we're going to work with CN, and then of course mathematical arithmetic operations, just like just like addition, subtraction, division, so on and so forth. Ano lang sa okay? Go ahead.
Kuan sir, kanan sa int sir ba sa taas? Kanang sulod na sa braces sir sa A and B and sum. Kuan na siya for input sir.
What do you mean by input? Int is a data type. Again, we'll discuss it later on. Int is a data type, meaning integer. And integers are the programming terminology for numbers. So in programming, we will not call it numbers. Let's say 1, 2, 3, but we will call it integer. Anyway, we'll discuss it in just a moment, okay? So
Okay,
the reason why I'm showing you this for me to be able to show you how variables work. Let's just focus on the variables for now. So in this case, we're able to store, once we run this program, we can enter different numbers for us to compute from without changing the program itself because we use variable. That's the advantage of using variables. So let's try it again. Let me show it to you one more time. So this time around, let's try, let's say 1, 2, and then 3, 4. Oops. So we have our first number is 12. The second number is 34. The moment that we can enter, it will provide us the sum. So what if I want a different set of numbers? So let's do the same thing, compile and run, and this time around, let's try to enter any other number. Let's say kana siya and kana. So see, it will still provide us with the result without really changing. We don't necessarily have to change the codes. Using variables, we can just enter any numbers that we want, and we don't necessarily have to change everything. Ano wala ko makitang tao? Can you turn on your cameras again, guys? Just keep your cameras turned on. Go ahead, Anthony.
Kuan sir ba? Pwede po siya ma-enter og kuan sir decimal.
Yes, but right now, since we're using int, it will not work. Muga na gyapon siya pero dili niya display ang decimal. Again, we will discuss about decimal points later on, okay?
Okay sir. So this time sir is all numbers.
Let's not focus on the numbers lang sa yun. Let's focus on how we use variables lang sa, okay? Gigamitan rin ako og integer so that I can show it to you how variables work. Okay, let's not focus on the numbers for the meantime. Let's focus on how we use variables. So, like I said, kanina, while we are doing an example, every time, pwede natong we enter og lain-lain nga number. Nabantayan ninyo, once we enter a number, we don't necessarily have to change the code. Is that what you observed? Ba po ninyo na-obserbaran?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, we don't necessarily have to change the code every time that we will enter different numbers. It's because we use variables. So, I want to, ganada ko nga emphasize the use of variables in programming. Using variables, we don't necessarily have to change the entire code every time that we're going to deal with numbers. Go ahead, Hamlet.
Sir, anong nigawas 1 to ganiya, sir, sa 4 digits?
I think it's just an error because we have to kinala akong gibuhat magod gaman akong shortcut because what mo taga-discuss. So I think this is what happened. Since we are still declaring declare pa lang nato ang variable, then gigaman na nako computation. So that's why it provide us with kuan ra siya murabag in programming it's called a Boolean. It's called Boolean. We'll discuss it in the future. Boolean is a yes or no or 1 and 0. Okay? So since sum is an integer, if we're going to write it this way, our value example is 5 and 6, then the result is 11, right? Now, if we're going to write it this way, int sum, this will, the compiler will think na nangutana ba ko if ang sum ba integer ba siya or dili. And since the value is 11, mutong gibutang siya of 1, which is equivalent of yes. Alright? So, katong gibot ganina, which di mo na ko inani. Alright? So, since ang value, for example, ang value sa A and B is 5 and 6, then the value of sum is 11, right? In this case, ang nahitabo, pagbasa niya ani, nakaingon ang compiler, nakaingon siya nga, murag nangutana ko if ang sum integer ba siya. So, that's why it resulted 1, which is, of course, means yes. Okay? Nagets ra? I'm not sure if nagets ba, but that's the explanation. Alright?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the proper way in creating equation is to separate it good, just like this. Motong makuha na to ang correct answer. Alright, let's proceed guys, okay? So long as we're able to understand what variables are, that's really important. So again, we use variables for us not to constantly change the program every time that we will run it. So, para magamit siya all the time ang atong program, especially if we're dealing with values or data, we have to use variables. Okay, so how do we write a variable? So that's very important. Unsa na to pagsulat of variable. So here are some other examples of C++ variables. So we have int. So obviously nakakita na tag int nina, and then age is 18. Then we have car. Middle initial is equals to J, and then string first name is equals to Ford, and then int result. So these are examples of C++ variables. So notice that the first thing that we're going to write is the data type, and then the variable name and value. Alright, so basically that's the syntax of a C++ variable. And of course, we should always end it with a semicolon. Always remember, every line inside our main function should always end with a semicolon. So how to write a C++ variable? So first is we're going to define the data type. And then we're going to type in the identifier and optional na value. This is optional depending on how we're going to use it in our program. Okay? But this is really important. First is the data type, identifier, and an optional na value. In this case, let's examine the first example. Alright, so this is a syntax. This is how we write variables. So if we're going to take a look at this, we know that int is data type, and then age identifier, and then 18 is the value. Alright, nagets ra? Do you follow, guys? Int is the data type.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And then age is the identifier, and then S is value. Why is it optional, man? Ano siguro optional? when do we make it optional? Ano na lang? Okay, let me just answer that para magdali na. The reason why it's optional is because as much as possible, we want our user to input the value of the, depending on how we want to use our program, but in most cases, we want the user to initialize or to input the value itself. So that's why sometimes we don't necessarily have to put a value on our variables because we want the users to enter the value. Just like kato example, kani, here, we didn't initialize a value for A and B. It's because we want it nga ang user na mismo ang mo-enter sa value kung i-run na ang program. Alright? Do you follow?
Yes, sir.
Alright. So in some cases, we don't necessarily have to put value depending on unsa atong ganahan may tapos sa program. So in this case, in this example, we have our int, that is the data type, and then we have age as the identifier, and 18. Alright, so question, ang age, kaning age, can we use any other words aside from age? Pwede ba tamo enter og lain-lain nga word?
Kanara sir ay.
Di ba? Ang question ako is, can we? Pwede ba natong islan, if ever, ang identifier?
Pwede.
Yes, pwede, sir.
Yes,
Pwede, sir.
Because the identifier is something that you will decide what to enter. Alright? The identifier is something that you will decide ug unsay imong ibutang. However, the data type should always be ug unsay dapat. Or about given na siya. Pero identifier, it is something that you have to decide unsalan. So, for the next example, we have car or char. That is our data type. Our identifier is middle initial and we initialize a value J. Same thing on the third, we have our data type, we have our identifier and the value, and then on the last one, we have data type and identifier only. Okay? So, let's talk about data types. So, we already know about int. Let's talk about the rest of the data types. So far, we have int, char, and string. A data type is a classification that specifies which type of value a variable has. It could be either numbers, text, paragraph, decimal points, etc. So, mo na tong question gani about decimal points. It is very important which data type we use when creating a variable. Here are some of the most common C++ data types. We have character, and then the keyword that we'll be using it in programming is char. And then we have integer, that's int. Floating point or double floating point, that's if we're going to write it in programming, it is either float or double. And then we have string, and then we have Boolean. Now, what exactly are these data types? So in our katong pagsugod nato sa klase ganina, I asked you to segregate the waste depending on its type, right? So we're able to segregate the different waste depending on its type. It could be either hazardous, biodegradable, and non-biodegradable. That's the same case here. Every time that we're going to deal with data, the first thing that we're going to do is to determine unsa siya nga type na data. That's the first thing that we're going to do. If we're going to create a program that will deal with data, the first thing that we're going to do is segregate the data. Not segregate, but identify what type of data that value has. So for example, this. Since this, we're talking about the value is 18. So since this is an age, unsa man ang age, number man ang age, di ba? Wala man siguro ganang ang age is letters or something like that. Number man din ang age, ang value niya. So therefore, we will use integer. Integer refers to numbers. And then for middle initial, our middle initial is single letter man na. Is that true? Mga middle initial are only one letter rather.
Yes, sir.
Alright, that's why we use char, because char or char is a data type for single symbol. And then for first name, most first name has multiple letters. In some cases, multiple words pa man gani. Alright, so since we'll be dealing with multiple symbol, multiple letters, multiple words, that is what you call string. Okay, so again, that's the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to identify, we're going to deal with data. First is we have to understand, we have to identify unsa siya nga klase nga data. It could be either number, decimal point, words, etc. Okay? And these are the common data types. There are tons of napay mga laing data types, but these are the common data types that we will encounter in programming, specifically in C++ programming. We have character, integer, floating point or double floating point, string, and Boolean. Let's talk about it one by one. Let's start with the character or char. It's called character, but if we're going to use it in programming, it's only char or char or char, however you pronounce it. It stores a single character. Always remember, it can only store single character, letter or number value. Kumbaga, loyal ang character o sara jud ang iyang ganahan. Okay? So, single character, letter or number value, we will use char. So, it could be either A, capital letter, small capital letter A, X, Y, 1, and any other symbol, so long as it's only 1. Okay? Remember, char will only store any data that is only 1. Integer stores whole numbers without decimals. So, like I said a while ago, in programming, we don't call numbers, but if you want to talk about numbers that has numerical values, then it's called integers. That means we are trying to compute its numerical value. We will call it integer. Alright? So, it is int. Now, maybe you're wondering, anong na number dere? Nga, og usara ka number pwede tayo magamit og 1. For example, we are trying to compute 1 plus 2. Diba? Tagsara man siya nga word at tagsara siya nga letter. Do you think we can use char? Since usara man ang 1, usara pud ang 2. Do you think we can use char if we want to compute 1 plus 2?
No.
Why is it?
No, sir.
Nga naman.
Kaya ang char is para sa alphabets.
Alphabet. Nakabutan diri is man, single character, letter, or number value.
Pwede di, sir?
Ah? No, okay? If we don't, yes, we can input 1 and 2 using char. We cannot compute it for numerical purposes. For example, muhatag ta og 1 sa atong character, and it will if we use, okay, for example, we're going to create a variable that says let's say 1 is equals to 1. Alright, so we can do it, of course. However, this number 1 right here has no longer numerical value. What do you mean by that? Di na to siya pwede ma-compute with any other numbers because nahimo ra siya nga symbol ra siya, nahimo siyang character, dili siya, wala siya value if we're going to use char. Nagets ang idea? That means if we're going to use char for 1, we cannot compute it by adding it to any other number or something like that. So the compiler will iyahaning i-understand that this is not a number but is a mere symbol. So therefore, if we're going to use numbers, although bisag usara siya kabuo, but if you want to use it for computation, then we should always use integer. Do you follow? Nagets ra?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Nakuha ra, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm hoping it's also the same case with the rest. I'm only hearing a few people. Alright, again, char doesn't have any numerical value. Single symbol character with no numerical value. However, for integer, it stores whole numbers. Nilamil, go ahead. Do you have a question, Nilamil?
Napindot ra, sir.
It's okay. Ay, kalma ra. Alright, integer is whole numbers. What do you mean by whole numbers, guys?
Walay ko, sir. Walay fraction. Dili siya fraction, di po siya decimal.
Alright, it's true. It's not fraction, it's not decimal. So therefore, any whole numbers. Walay kapid, walay kulang, just like this. 1, 5600, and 10101010. These are all integers, meaning whole number, walay decimal, walay fraction. True. So that's it. It could be either negative or positive so long as it doesn't have any fraction or decimal points. And then we have floating point. It stores fractional numbers containing one or more decimals, sufficient for storing 7 decimal digits. Alright, so actually in this case, floating point and double floating point is basically they are the same thing. They only differ with the number of decimal points you can use. So if we want to use decimal points, ang kutob ra og 7 decimal points, then we can use float. So for example, this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 ra kutob, then we can use float. However, if you're dealing with decimal point that has more than 7 decimal points, more than 7 decimal places, then we will use double floating point. Alright? So in programming, we will use float or double. So these are the keywords, meaning kani ato ibutan sa atong code. So again, floating points are used for decimal points. Go ahead, Anthony.
Kuan sir ba, ang int ug float sir, pwede na siya matapad nimo since di man ta kabalon sa enter sa user sir.
That's true. Okay, so that's a good answer. Most of the time, okay. Ano na lang, the float will still work with whole numbers. Okay, let's put it this way. Ang float or double, even though it is intended for decimal point, but it will still work with whole numbers. So if ang imo program might deal with decimal numbers, then it's always safe to use float instead. Okay, if there is a possibility that your program may deal with decimal points, then it would be best if we can use float instead, float or double. Okay, usually pag magamatag calculator, sometimes ang i-compute sa users nato kay na a decimal point. So therefore, instead of using integer that will only cater whole numbers, we will use float instead, because float can work for both whole numbers and decimal points. Alright, ana lang. And another example is, for example, if we're going to compute average. Okay, example, although whole numbers ang enter sa user, let's say 5, 3, and 5, 3, and 7. Okay, sakto ba? So 5 plus 3 is 8, plus 7 is 15, divided by 3, so that's 5. How about 8? Okay, kani. For example, you have the average of 3 numbers, although whole numbers sila puro, but if we're going to compute the average, so we have 8 plus 8, 16 divided by 3, it's 5 kapin, alright, 5.3 or something. So the result is 5.33 or something like that. So this is already a decimal. So, diba, although whole number ang gi-input sa user, there is still a possibility na ang result niya is decimal point. Therefore, I would advise to use float if you're dealing with data that has the possibility of resulting, or let's say dealing with decimal points. Okay, did I answer your question, Anthony? That's actually a good question. Yeah, I didn't realize it until now.
Yes sir, thank you sir.
No problem. So again, if you're dealing with a product, if you're dealing with a data that has a possibility of getting it decimals, then it would be best if we're going to use float. So 5 plus 3 plus 8 divided by 3. 5.33 lagi. Alright. So let's see. Although puro whole numbers itong enter, it still provide us with a decimal. So let's anticipate whatever it is the value that we may use in our program, that we may deal with, and then use the appropriate data type. So that is float and double floating point. Unsa gito yung difference between the float and double floating point? Unsa gito difference? Anyone?
Float sir kay 7 ra ang digit ay double kay pwede daghan tipo
15. In decimal places. Okay? But most of the time, kanos amatamon gama og program no about 7 decimal places. But just in case if you'll be dealing with decimal places nga maabot of 7 or more, that's the time that we're going to use double. But most of the time, let's try to keep it using float only. Alright, string stores more than one symbol or characters. This is good for words, paragraph, etc. To use strings, you must include additional header file in the source code string library. So this is something that we have to take note for us to make sure that the string, if we'll be dealing with string in data type, we should always include string. Diba? Before, kaniraman, include IO stream. But if we'll be dealing with string data type, it's always best to add this. Because in some cases, there might be some chances nga dili kaya siya mo work. So for us to be able to make use of the string data type, we have to add this to our header file. Instead of just the IO stream, mamani pinakauna nga line, di ba? Ang IO stream.
Yes, sir.
Remember? We
Yes,
will
sir.
add
Yes, sir.
string if our
Sir.
program will use string. So what exactly are strings, by the way? Strings are again stores more than one symbol or characters. So just like an example, if katong ganina, string. So we all know that car will only store one, but if it's gonna be more than one, we will use string. So this is good for, let's say, first name, last name, address, etc. So long as it uses multiple letters or characters, we will use string. But again, for us to properly use string, every time we run it, we should always add it to the second line. So this time, we're going to include not just IO stream, but also string library. So this is ano lang. And then a Boolean. Boolean is something that we don't necessarily use that much, but it's mostly used for conditional statement or logical expression. So I cannot give an example for now because kung maghahatag ko example about Boolean, I know nga maglibog ta kay nganong naabot man tag conditional statement na sir. So for the meantime, let's just think of Boolean stores true or false value, meaning 1 is true, 0 is false. Muna nahitabo ganina nga 1 ang iyang gi-answer. It's because the compiler thought that I was trying to ask if the katong int ang sum is integer ba siya. So that's why it resulted 1 because it's true na ang sum is an integer. Alright? So right now, I cannot give you an example na dili maka-cause of confusion with regards to bool, but let's just say that Boolean is either true or false. It's like mostly it will be used for conditional statements or logical expressions, and that will be discussed in our future lesson. Okay? Nato na any question?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So again, how to write variables? So we're going to write the data type and identifier, and then optional na value. So do you have any questions so far with the data type? We only have 5 for today. We have character, integer, string, floating point, double floating point, and Boolean. So far, do you have any questions? Or maybe na wala na types nga you are confused. Anthony, go ahead.
Sir, kanang string, sir, ba? For variables, lagi na siya, sir. Nga, programming.
Ano, strings, every time that we're going to add multiple words, we're, katong kanina, as an example, this one right here, this is also a string. Because a string is group of text, group of letters, group of symbols, something like that. So this is also a string. But for variables, it's also called string. Alright? So basically,
Wala lagi siya kuan, sir. Wala lagi siya kanang sa second niya nga kuan, sir, wala lagi tong string.
Asa man second?
Kanang sa ikaduha nga kuan, sir, step.
Katong include string, sir ba?
Oh, kani wala man tagagamit og variable nga string yet. Wala man tayo variable nga string. We only use string as a text output. But if we're going to use with variable, for example, we're going to use string here, string, and then let's say, sample lang, result. If we'll be doing this na, it will still work, by the way, the IO stream, but in some cases it may not. So that's why we have to always include. If we'll be dealing with string variable, that's the time that we're going to include string. Okay? Because kabantay mo, ang int ni highlight ni line ang color, pero ang string wala. Okay? So therefore, there's something wrong with the string that we have to declare. There's something different, not wrong, but there's something different, which is I don't know yet. Nganong wala siya ga-highlight? Di ba dapat tanang variable, tanang data type should highlight, for example, car. Right? Mo-highlight yun na siya. Float. Pero ang string delay. So there is something different with string that we have to write an additional na library. Okay? But we'll only use this, we'll only add this if we'll be dealing with variable na string. Okay? Did I answer your question?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, next let's talk about identifier. So pretty much in creating an identifier, it will be totally up to us. We can write whatever we want. We can, yeah, so long as it has letters, something like that. But there are a few things that we have to think about when writing the identifier. Diba? Kita rin bahala, diba? It's called variable name, identifier. An identifier is a user-defined word used to represent the variable. So the first step is to define the variable, the data type rather, and after that we're going to declare the identifier. And it is something that user-defined, meaning, okay, user-defined, meaning ikaw, ang user ang bahala unsa iyahang ganahang ibutang as identifier. Programmers can either use any words or string of alphanumeric characters as identifier. When you say alphanumeric, it's a combination of both alphabet and number. Identifiers must always start with an alphabet. That's the first thing though. Even though we can use whatever identifier we want, but it should always start with an alphabet or underscore. It shouldn't start with any other symbols or numbers. So for example, okay, to use identifier, it must be written after the data type. So if this is our data type, this is the identifier, A. Another example is float and an average. A and average are the identifier for the data types int and float. So instead of the I, we can write whatever we want, so long as it should always, okay, always start with an alphabet or underscore only. Therefore, if we're going to write a data, if we're going to data type kani, let's say, which kani number 1 is siya. All right, int 1a. Do you think this is valid? Is this valid? 1a, our identifier.
No, sir.
Okay, nga naman.
Wala siya float.
No, like I said, this is our data
Wala
type.
siyang underscore.
All right. Again, always remember whenever we write a data identifier, it should always start with alphabet. But since we started with number, therefore this is invalid. Okay. How do we fix it? We can either add
A1.
underscores sa simultanan. All right. So again, identifier should always start with an alphabet or underscore. Other than that, it would be an invalid. Another invalid variable identifier is this. For example, let's say, all right, and okay. So, do you think this is valid?
No, sir.
No, because at is no longer, it's not an alphabet. Since this is a symbol and the only symbol that is acceptable is underscore, therefore this is invalid. Okay, so this is an example of data types or identifiers that we created a while ago, A and B, and then sum. So since all of them are alphabet, starting with alphabet, it is fine. Okay, while you can choose any words as your identifiers, there are words whose meaning is already defined by C++. Like I said a while ago, you can use whatever identifier, you can use any words as identifier, pero naay mga exemption. There are some words whose meaning is already defined by C++. Therefore, you cannot use it as identifiers. So these are called C++ keywords. So these numbers or these words cannot be used as identifier. You can use whatever it is. You can use your name as your identifier, but you cannot use these ASM, auto, bool, so on, because these words already have a meaning inside C++ compilers. All right, so just think of it. Maybe you can take a screenshot, and every time that you're going to create an identifier, make sure nga wala ni. So meaning we cannot use false, float, for, friend, goto, if, inline, public, register, and so on. Do you follow? Nagets siya?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
My question, sir.
Good.
Regarding na sir ba kay What if kuan ra sir mo mo kag comment sir magamit ra sa comment
Ano siya magamit na comment? What do you mean?
ang kanang nga mga kuan sir variables
See, gay ko na kog
ay may
situation.
keywords.
Gay ko na kog situation.
Like for example ang comment ay wala man siya sir na may this di ba sa keyword. What if ang comment is kuan follow this instruction murag nga
Kung
na sa
comment.
internet.
Ay, no, this is only for variables. We can use this to, pwede natong gamiton ni sa tanan nga mga words for any other purposes. Let's say, ganahan ka mo add of comment, ganahan ka mo add of string, like instructions. But if we cannot use it as identifier, so let me clarify this. Kani cannot be used as identifier. So we can still use it for any other purposes. Let's say ganahan ka mo add of text, mag-see out ra ka of text, we can still use like this template throw. The only thing that we cannot use it for is identifiers or our identifiers. So for example, variable, let's say this is equals to 9. All right. So this is an invalid variable. It's because we cannot use this as identifier as stipulated here. Okay. Another example, load private equals 5.9. Is this valid or not?
Not.
Okay, it's invalid. It's because private is a predefined na identifier. So again, we can use whatever identifier that we want so long as wala ni nabutang. But we can use it for any other purposes. Let's say ganahan ka mo see out. Let's say kani see out. This is a private switch. Private switch. Alright. Is this okay ra ba ni? Now we have this, we have private, and then we have switch.
Yep.
We have this private and then
Okay ra sir.
alright. Nga okay ra ganin ni siya kay?
Dili man siya identifier,
That's
sir.
true. Alright.
Instruction or
Oh.
siya sir.
You got it. Okay, so long as it's not used for identifier, then it's fine. However, we cannot use all of this as identifiers.
How about sa kuan sir? CXX droid.
Same rin yapon. CXX join.
Okay.
It's in general man siya nga C++ na language.
Okay,
Alright.
thank you sir.
Okay, so here, although we've already discussed it, but let's summarize what we've already learned. So in writing a variable, it is three. It's about 3 Ds. Definition, declaration, or DDI. Definition, declaration, and initialization. So these are the 3 ways, the 3 steps in writing a variable. The definition, declaration, and initialization are the 3 steps in writing a variable. Let's start with definition. Definition is simply defining which data type to use depending on the value. So the first thing we're going to do is identify unsalan nga value ang atong gamiton. So for example, we're going to create a program that will list down all the ID numbers of students. ID numbers. Ayan na lang ID kay usahay ang ID na ay alphanumeric. So let's say mo list down siya sa tanang ages, mga edad sa mga students. So it will be talking about age. What should be the proper data type? If it's age.
Int sir.
Okay, int. Alright. So the first thing that we're going to do when we write variable is to define what data type to use. Okay, depending on the value that you're going to deal with, you have to select the right data type. So that's definition. Okay. Alright, another example. What if magawa ka program that will list down the address sa mga students? What should be the data type to use?
String sir.
Okay, string. It's true because strings are words of paragraph. So So first thing that you're going to do is define which data to use. Another example, if it's gonna be let's say ganahan kang i-compute ang average nga allowance, daily allowance sa mga students, what would be the data type?
Double.
Pwede float, pwede int, sir.
Okay. But the best dili yung pwede kay pwede. We have to make sure of the one that is truly that's the best good. Unsa siguro?
Float,
Talk
sir.
about money.
Float, sir, float.
Float
Float, sir.
double. Okay. It's because money will tend to give us decimal points. Diba? Especially if we're dealing with the average of daily allowance of all the students. So obviously naa siya possibility nga mahimo siyang decimal, therefore we will use float. Alright, so that's the first step in writing a variable. We have to define the data, the type of the data that we'll be dealing with. That's definition. So pilihan to nato aning actually kanirang upat. In the future we'll be encountering bool, but let's just include bool kay basig mangluod siya. So we have int, char, float, double, and string. Okay? And then declaration. Declaration is writing the variable identifier. Right? So once we've already declared or defined which data to use, which data type rather, the next thing that we're going to do is to declare an identifier. Identifiers must always start with an alphabet or underscore, and to use an identifier, it must be written after the data type. So just like in our example, we have data type and identifier. So once you already know which data type to use, then the next thing that we're going to do is to declare an identifier. So like I said, you can use any identifier if you want, except of these words. Except any, you can use every identifier that you want. However, aside adding exception, it should always start with an alphabet or underscore. Meaning, dili siya pwede mag-start of number, dili siya pwede mag-start of any other characters. So only the acceptable only is alphabet and underscore. Kana iyang starting ba. And then, okay, identifiers must only include one word. Should you desire to put multiple words, you can separate them by adding an underscore, a hyphen, or just write them in a single word. Alright? So in writing identifier, it should always be one word only. So for example, first name. We all know that if you want to use first name as identifier, we all know first name is two words, diba? So one very good tip is to either separate them with an underscore or just write them down in one single word, tagtangon rin mo ang space, or you can add a hyphen. Just make sure na mahimo ra siyang one word or yun. Imuhang identifier. So like I said, if you'll be dealing with, for example, first name, dapat duwang ta siya ka word, but just find a way to make it one word. Like adding underscore, or just remove the space, or adding a hyphen. It would totally up to you. Alright, and another thing to take note, wala na ako nabutang, I don't think nabutang na ako is that C++ is sensitive. Oops. What do you mean by case sensitive? Anyone? C++ is a case sensitive programming language. What do you mean by case sensitive? Any idea? Please take note.
Dali siya mo
take
detect
down.
og errors.
So, go ahead, Anthony.
Dali siya mo catch na pug answer errors.
Alright, sensitive kayo siya. Dali kayo siya masakitan. Alright. When say case sensitive, thank you, Anthony. But what meaning sa case sensitive is, first is what is case? Diba? Natay uppercase, lowercase. Diba? Uppercase, lowercase. May pa sa cases. Uppercase, lowercase. What do you mean by uppercase letter? For example,
Capital.
Capital letters. That's atong common word. And then lowercase is kani. C++ is case sensitive. Meaning, kung unsay giunsa nimo siya pag-declare, If it's going to be in capital letters, you can only use it for capital letters for the entire program. That means this one, for example, our identifier is age. Right? This is not the same with name. So these two are different because C++ is case sensitive. Therefore, age with capital letter A is different from age with with small letter A. Okay, so that's what you call case sensitive, meaning depending on how you use, whether you use it for capital letters or lowercase, they will be given with different meaning, different value. So another example is, for example, use this as the identifier. This is a different identifier.
Nawala lagi.
Kasi nawala man.
Ay, sorry sir. Nawala ang share screen mo sir. Napislit ba? Sa pagbalik ni sir.
Nawala. Basig na kay napin, i-click ra ng kanang pin nga icon. Basig na kay napin nga lain. I'm not sure. Alright. Anyway, nag-gets ra idea sa case sensitive, guys. Meaning, if we're going to use an identifier that is capital letter, it's gonna, although same siya, for example, case and case, same siya of di ba, letters, pero the first one is capitalized, the second one is not. They are still different. Alright? So, please take note of that. C++ is case sensitive. Nag-gets ra ang idea sa case sensitive?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
Gamay, sir.
Sa gamay ra. Again, just take note nga kung giyon sa niyo siya pagsulat sa imong identifier, make sure nga same po nimo paggamit for the entire program. So if this is how you, for example, first name, if this is how you write it in your identifier, make sure nga inani po nimo paggamit sa imong program. Otherwise, it will not work. So, for example, first name is different from this. Small letter. That is not the same. Okay? And then lastly, initialization. It's setting an initial value to the variable. Although this part is optional depending on how you're going to use it. So for example, int A is equals 50, int B is equals 40. So this is only necessary if you want to be very specific with the value. If you want the value of your variable to be specific, meaning specific siya ba, then you're going to initialize it with certain values. But most of the time, we will let our users enter the value for us. But again, the optional step, which is, the next step is initialization. Basically, you're just going to initialize the value of your variable. So when you say initialize, you're going to give it its first value. But still, since it's variable, it can still be changed all throughout the program. But the initial value, for example, in this case, is 50. Meaning, mo na pinakauna niya nga value. Unlike if wala ni, our variable A doesn't have any values at all. We will just base it with how the users enter, or what the users enter. Alright, and however, the initialized value must agree with the data type it defines. What do you mean by this? The initialized value, it must agree. Must agree jud ang term. Pwede glaing nga term. It's okay. Siguro katulugon kay ko gagamaani, so it's okay. The initialized value must agree. What do you mean by that? Sa siguro pasabot ana. Or match. Okay, match na lang. The initialized value must match with the data type it defines. So for example, in this case, we use 50. Is this a valid value for integer? Go ahead, Anthony. Go ahead.
Sir, pwede sa ako mo out. Mabalik raw, sir. Kaya wala yung mag-share.
Sige, sure. Alright. Is this a valid value, guys? Go ahead, Anthony. We initialize 50 as our variable for as the value for variable A. Is this valid? It says here the initialized value must match or must agree with the data type it defines. Go ahead. Guys, apa mo? Alright, is this valid? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Nga naman?
Yes, sir. This is a valid.
Nga nang valid man kayo? Remember, int are for numbers. Since 50 is number, therefore this is a valid. However, muna gipasabot na ko dere, the initialized value must match with the data type it defines. So for example, we'll write int a equals to let's say average. Alright, is this a valid value?
No, sir.
Ano?
No.
No,
Go
sir.
ahead, Nila, go ahead. It's a to
Ay,
Nila.
dili man sa number, sir.
Alright, so that's what I meant when I said the initialized value must match with the data type it defines, because average is not an integer, therefore this is not a valid value. So same thing, you have to make sure that if you're going to initialize a value, it should always match with the data type it defines. Alright, so format. So how do we write an initialized value? There are different ways to do it depending on the data type. So each data type has its own way of setting values or initializing a value. If char or car, the value must be enclosed with a single quote. For example, char middle initial is R with single quote. Take note of that. Again, each data type has different way of setting values. So for char, it should always be enclosed with a single quote. And then for string, the value must be enclosed with double quote. Alright? So for example, string, full name, Tony Stark, it should always be enclosed with double quotation. So pag car, unsa lang ganito? Pag car, pag one single character lang, using car, how do we write the initialized value?
Kuan, sir, single quote ra.
Okay, single quote ra. But if it's string, double quote. Take note of
Double
that.
quote.
Double quote.
Alright, di ata pwedeng di ata possible nga magkasayop sayo sa pag-initialize of value. So again, if it's just character, it's one single quote. If multiple, two quote. The best way to memorize it, since we know that car will only store one single file or one single character, then one single quotation pod. Since string can store multiple letters, then it's gonna be two quotation. I think that's the best way to memorize it. And for int, float, double, and bool, there are no need for enclosure. So no enclosure for the value. So for float and integer or any kanang nasa numerical value, then there's no need for enclosure. We're going to enclose it only for char, that's with single quotation, and for string, double quotation. Gets?
Yes, sir.
Alright, take note.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Alright, and there are two formats in declaring and initializing variables. Number one, all variables can be declared and initialized separately. For example, here, we have two integers. Natay duwa ka integer. So we can either write it this way, meaning int A, int B. We can use it separately. It's perfectly fine. Or, number two, variables with the same data type can be declared together, but it must be separated with a comma. So another example is, this is the first way, first format. We can just write them individually. However, if it's gonna be the same, if both A and B variables have the same data type, which is int, we can just write it this way. Int is A, comma B. The compiler will automatically know that both A and B are integers. But this will only apply if both of them have the same value, same data type. For example, another example is float. So for average and result, both of them are decimal points, therefore we can just write it this way. Float average, comma, result. Alright? So that is the two way in writing or initializing or writing a variable. So in declaring a variable, if pwede na itong siyang binagsaon, but those who have the same data type, you can write it in a single line separated by a comma. And always end with a semicolon. Alright, so let's have a practice activity. Anay, gibutang naman ako daan ang variable diri. Alright, let's have another one. Let me ask somebody from the class. A program that displays the user's first name. This is an example. Can anyone please give us another example? The string is, na naman eh, nagibutan naman ako ang answer na good. Nagibutan naman ako. Dapat i-question naman ako eh. Alright, so it's okay. So we have a program that will display the user's first name. So how do we write the variable? So the data type is string, of course. And then the identifier that we'll be using is first name. Therefore, if we're going to write it in a variable, it's going to be string, and then first name, and then we can initialize the value, let's say Tony. And since it is a string, it is enclosed with double quotation. Okay? We follow?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Program number 2. A program that displays the user's first name, last name, and age. So what are the data types that we'll be using? We have string for the first name and last name, and then integer for the age. Our identifiers are first name, last name, and age. And for us to write the variables, we have string first name, string last name is, for example, this, and then age 50. Alright. And then program number 3, a program that displays the sum of two numbers. So the data types that we'll be using, since sum man atong gipangita, so we are safe with decimal points. Therefore, we'll be using int for the first and second number, and then sum. Identifiers is num1, num2, and then sum. And the variables are int num1, num2, and then sum. Or we can, like I said, we can either write it in a single line, since we've already since all of them are int or integer, or we can write them separately. Right? Supposedly, kamo mo tayo muhatag ano niya, ano nang gibutan na ako ang answer direkta. Alright. Anyway, that's it for today. For your assignment, I'm going to give you this. You're going to write variable lang. For the meantime, just write a variable. You don't necessarily have to create a program, but you're just going to write the variable for the following program. So first is a program that displays the quotient of two integers. Okay. So what are the variables? What are the data types that you're going to use? You're going to declare your own variable, and then you can also initialize if you want to. And then second, a program that displays your first name, middle initial, last name, and address. Alright, what are the identifiers of it? So this is how you're going to write it, by the way. Okay. So first is you're going to write the data type, identifier, and variables. So each number, you'll have 3 groups of answers. So for example, number 1, a program that displays the quotient of two integers. Therefore, your answer should be like this: data, and then, so for example, number 1, data type, and then identifier, and then variables. Alright, so dapat na yung answer, okay? And then number 2 and number 3. Nag-gets ang assignment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Alright,
Yes, sir.
so
Asay sulat na, sir.
Nag-asa, sir.
Basta na, basta mabasa na ako. Basta
sir.
mabasa na, klaro. Alright, and then I'm going to upload it on the Google Classroom. So you can, if you'd like, if kinahanglan ka mo try, you can, pwede nimang buhaton dagama kang program, kani, para ma-practice po mo, pwede po mo magama og program. You know what? I think you should create a program na lang. Okay. Additional, upat na yung answer na, upat. Ikaw is ang program itself. So each time, you'll have 4 answers. One is the data type, identifier, variable, and then the program. So you're going to create a program that will display the quotient of two integers. Since most of this are okay, alright, output ratanan, ay ra sa mo gamit og int, katong cin, output lang tanan since output pa lang ato na discuss. So therefore na ay 3 output per number, 4 rather, the data types, identifier, and variable, and then the program. And then for number 2, same thing, data type, identifier, variable, and a program. So basically, you're going to create a program that displays your first name, initial, middle initial, last name, and address. So you don't necessarily have to use CN, guys, okay? So just initialize it. For example, your name is, akong name, Juleus, middle initials R, Publico, and address, Bais. So I'm just going to initialize it because here you can write identifier and initiate the variable value on your own. Ano lang. Ayaw mo gamit og CN since wala pa na discuss. Right? Do you have any questions? Anthony, go ahead.
Kanang 1, 2, 3 among gamag program, sir.
Oh, 1, 2, 3. 1, kani, like I said, upat output kada number. Kaya na, 1 week dito ang assignment. So, you're going to list down the data types that will be used. Then, you're going to list down the identifiers, write down the identifiers, and then write the variable, and then the program. Screenshot lang ang program, screenshot gyapon output and input. Code and output. And then, for number 2, list down the data types that you're going to use. Then, write down the identifiers, and then the variables, and then the program. Just compile it and nasa yun rin na akong mabasa, guys, okay? Kaya mabasa rin po na akong dali. And then for number 3, list down the data types to be used, write down the identifier, write down the variable, and then attach the screenshot for your program. Both the code and the output. Then deadline is gonna be next week. So
Next meeting, sir?
Next meeting, right?
Or Friday.
Next meeting, October 19. Anyway, you can still submit. Bahalag malate mo. Pwede na mo submit yapon. Pero, itag na ako as late. So, if mo submit mo after 19 next week, I will still accept it, but it will be tagged as late. So,
pero wala ang lagay minus.
Na minus, of course. Na minus ang mga late. Usually, I deduct 5 points. Good. So, tanan ako mga na-checkan.
Dakuha lagi ng deduct, sir.
Oh, Jud, harong ma-make sure na mga students will make it on time.
Sige, sir.
So,
Sir,
kumusta mo? Harong mali paghihapon.
Musta mo
Kita
last time, sir?
sa
Karon wala pa na ako, to be honest, wala pa na ako na-check ang mga assignment, guys. Right now, to be honest, wala pa. I'm planning to check it all together during midterm. Kaya na may sem break. Na may kanang kumbaga not sem break. Kana baga
Na may sem break, sir?
Oh, pero after the semester pa. What I mean is na-silent week ba? Na-silent week. A week before the midterm.
Oh, why?
Yes. A week before the midterm, and the midterm itself is called silent week, meaning dili magklase ang mga instructor because you'll focus more on the midterm or just the midterm itself. So during that time, if dili ko magklase, that's the time that I'm going to start checking your assignment. But for your assessment activities, katong Google Form, automatic naman siyang mo-check on its own. Kabantay mo pag-check sa result, pag-submit ninyo na na-result dayon, di ba? Katong sa
Yes,
Google
sir.
Okay.
So, sir, before midterm, sir, nami pa Hawaii?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Based ako among nasalayan before, na what you call silent week. It's not really something that
Murag silbi tuon na, sir.
Week na siya. Pero depende rin po sa instructor ninyo, guys, okay? Depende rin po sa instructor. But the university will give us silent week. That week
1 week na, sir.
1 week na. That week is intended only for reviewing. So the other instructors will meet you for 30 minutes. Depende na just to give you pointers. That's pala. Or depende rin po sa instructor. But generally, ideally, katong ka face-to-face pa mi sa una, ang silent week is sometimes meet ang teacher only to give pointers. So most probably 30 minutes lang, and then the students will be given the rest of the day to review. And then on the midterm or final examination week itself, wala na di klase. Inyo rang attenan ang katong mga klase nga mo exam mo. That's during face to face. So now that we are doing online class still, so I'm not sure, pero it will depend on the instructor really happen.
Okay, sir.
For me, actually next week naman ang midterm or next week. So I'm only going to give you a silent week on the midterm itself, on the actual midterm week lang. Okay?
Lunes.
Alright, so do you have any questions before we end? May more
Wala.
questions?
Wala na,
Let me
sir.
stop the let me stop the attendance now. So that's total of 1 hour 49 minutes. Let me stop the recording too. And if now